The Tegan Show is all about critical conversations that matter to you. Because why not? Democracy is for the people, of the people, and by the people. With me here is Dwight Bullard. He is a former senator from Florida,
yes,
and also the senior political advisor of Florida Rising.
Thank you.
Good to have you on. Let's talk about Florida Rising, the work that you do with voter suppression.
Yeah, so Florida Rising is a state-based social justice and political organization. We have offices throughout the state of Florida. We also recognize that Florida is ground zero for voter suppression, as are many southern states. But we're trying to push back against that through voter education. We really want people to be the masters of their own destiny and ultimately take whatever political gains they have in their own hands.
So when we talk of voter suppression, what structures or barriers are in place that make it hard for people to vote?
So this is an important question and so funny and timely, because oftentimes people view voter suppression in this historical context of people being openly dishonest or, creating physical barriers to voting. The truth of the matter is voter suppression in the modern day context are things like legal barriers, changes to the mechanisms and mechanics of voting that make it more difficult for folks. So as an example, during the 2020 election, the governor of the state of Florida got on TV that night and said this was the best election that Florida's ever had. It was the most access people have ever had to the ballot box, understanding that vote by mail was an option because this was during the height of the pandemic. Then, over the course of the next 4 years, that same governor now has changed the rules around vote by mail, limiting access, rules around drop boxes, rules around eligibility in terms of who has the right to vote. Prime example is that back in 2018, the state of Florida passed Amendment 4, which was the restoration of rights to returning citizens or folks who have felony convictions. The intent of that when people passed it was that people who had served their time would be given the right to vote as soon as that law passed. The truth of the matter is that the governor has created more restrictions and more barriers. So those are some examples of what voter suppression looks like in 2024, is for those who are eligible, you all need to be advocates for those who have yet to have access.
Got it. For young people that are so busy, always multitasking, why is voting important for them?
Voting is important because everything that you care about is really at the ballot box. Tuition for schools and the cost of tuition, the cost of car insurance and healthcare insurance for young people, the ability for young people to buy a home or start a family are all political related concepts. And a lot of people don't appreciate that. When I was an elected official, the state of Florida is responsible for 65% of the everyday actions of people. What do I mean by that? From the way you flush the toilet to the way to how fast you drive, to what schools get what kind of funding, are all dictated by state politics. So when you're not thinking about who's the governor, who's your state representative, or who's your state senator, you're missing out.
So I want to switch gears now and talk about the national elections coming up. Like most people, Biden, Trump, at least the presumptive nominee, and inflation, healthcare, what we're doing in the world, everything is really murky. You can't really tell what one party is saying, what the other party is saying as well. And it seems like, not to be ageist, we don't have that many options. So Biden, Trump, what are your thoughts on that?
Listen, I'm like anybody. I don't like the choices either, right?
Okay, fair enough.
But the choices are the choices. I'm never going to discourage people from participating in any given election. And sometimes elections aren't about, people will boil it down to lesser of two evils. I oftentimes say that elections boil down to picking your opponent.
But to be fair, I don't even know their ideals.
I get it. But the question becomes, two different things, right? When I say picking your opponent, oftentimes we have to realize that in opposition, in a fight, if you were to be able to choose between somebody who was a 120-pound, frail individual and somebody who was a 400-pound, 6'8", big individual, as to who you have the better chances of winning, you got to pick who you pick, right? Even if you fundamentally disagree with both, you have to understand that as an option. The other part of that, and I think this is essential, is we live in a culture in which we walk around with what is called a smartphone.
Okay.
Right? And right now, people are talking about the beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake and have vivid thoughts and can give you an ideological breakdown on what Kendrick Lamar is thinking, what Drake said here, who said what, and will give you a breakdown. So when people say that they don't know what these folks are saying or what these folks are about, you're being disingenuous when you have the ability to look up both, to look up their track records, look up their voting records, look at what they passed, what they've supported, good, bad, or indifferent, and be able to make then an informed decision.
Yes, but there's also misinformation as well too. So, if we are also giving people the choice to pick up their phone, they can also be easily misled.
100%. And I totally understand the notion of misinformation, but it really boils down to where you're getting your information from. And using the Kendrick Lamar Drake scenario is that, yeah, you could go to sites like the Shade Room or some other places and get kind of bits and pieces of information. But you can also go to Kendrick Lamar's catalog and body of work. You can go to Drake's body of work. You can look at what these folks have offered up as consideration for what they're about. So I use this example with Biden versus Trump. When I say they have a voting record, that means you can look up Joe Biden's voting record for the entire U.S. Senate. You can look up what Trump supported or did not support during his 4 years as a president and make a decision. And not to mention, use the voices of the people that are saying it. When, Donald Trump says, I want to be a dictator on day one, that's not misinformation. Okay. That is Donald Trump telling you, here's what I plan to do on day one.
But at a community level, there's also a role that community members have to play as well. So telling, your neighbors, having conversations as well, because without those, you can't really educate or inform people.
100%. I mean, that's what Florida Rising aims to do, and we like to advocate ourselves as a resource. But what I also say when it comes to voting is not an individual exercise, meaning that my one vote doesn't feel like it can make a difference. However, the collection of votes that are generated from that very community you mentioned are the difference maker.
So, Electoral College, created in a very racist, structure and system.
Yes.
Still exists. I believe a lot of states, 48 states, have like winner take all right now. How do you have elections whereby somebody wins the popular vote, as we've seen, with the Gore situation, as with Clinton as well, and then loses out? Can we, at some point, get to reforming that system?
Well, I'm a firm believer that the Electoral College should be abolished. I'll stand on that. Until we get there, I do want to remind folks that only 4 elections have been one where the Electoral College and the popular vote did not match up. 3 of those being in the modern sense that you talked about. But I think that reinforces why the Electoral College needs to go.
But 3 also hurting Democrats as well, too, right?
I totally understand that, but that's the nature of racism, is that many of the states that hold these votes don't have the population to support it. The reality is that between Texas, California, New York, Florida, and Michigan, you're talking about a substantial part of the electorate in terms of population and numbers. Yet and still, those votes aren't as weighted as they probably should be.
It's not as even as it should be.
100%.
When it comes to the role the U.S. has in the Israel-Palestine conflict, there's a lot going on for years and years. And so many people are also not aware, don't have interest. But when it comes to that, how are we doing? What is the way forward for the U.S.?
Well, listen, the fact of the matter is Palestinians are oppressed people. Okay. Black people are oppressed people. So there's a connection between oppressed people worldwide. And we should always understand that. The U.S.'s role, unfortunately, has been the primary supplier of weapons to the state of Israel. And so the U.S. plays a significant role when the very bombs that are coming from U.S. manufacturers over to the state of Israel are being used in what I would call identify as a genocide.
Playing devil's advocates right now, does Israel have a right to protect the country?
Listen, one's right to protect itself versus the obliteration of an entire group of people should not be some sort of fine line exercise. The people of Palestine don't have a standing army. Mm-hmm. The people of Palestine have never exercised sort of this overt right to want to inflict harm on the state of Israel. The truth of the matter is, on October 7th, we're not talking about a singular occurrence that happens in a bubble. If you ask the people of Palestine, there's been significant harassment since 1948. And they also are saying, what is our right to defend ourselves? But when we're looking at the conflict since October 7th, there's no symmetry. You have 37,000 people, 70% who are women and children, who have been killed in Gaza.
I believe the numbers say like 4 ceasefire deals have been sent to Hamas and rejected. So I'm trying to understand what's going on. So Israel is sending these ceasefire deals to Hamas. Hamas is saying no. They're reaching out.
Again, there's no symmetry. If a deal says that I'll stop bombing you if you send the hostages that you have back, but as soon as you send the hostages back, I reserve the right to keep bombing you. That is not a ceasefire deal that anyone would want to take. You know, you put that in any terms and it seems disingenuous. And so if we're going to have an honest conversation about what Palestinian liberation looks like and what Israeli protection looks like, let's have that. But that has not been the conjecture that has happened.
I want to ask you, this administration right now, where are they? Are they pro-Palestine or pro-Israel?
Well, the current President Biden has been very adamant about his support of the state of Israel. And they haven't really, part of what is driving a lot of the outrage, a lot of the protest that is happening is their inability to nuance that discussion, to really have a robust, fair discussion about what it looks like to protect Palestinian rights and at the same time support what you consider an ally. Because that can't happen, 38 states now have campus protests.
Speaking of protests, there are lots of discussions going on about a House bill possibly being passed that's going to expand the definition of anti-Semitism. You also have colleges across the board. I believe USC, different colleges just canceling graduations.
Right.
I know you're an educator, and so many people think about graduations. Do we really need to cancel these graduations?
I don't think we do. But I also think that we're losing sight that colleges were initially designed for honest discourse, for people who could disagree with each other and still move forward. You know, when I was in college, you had college Republicans, college Democrats coexisting on the same HBCU campus. And there was never fundamental disagreement that would lead to the cancellation of a graduation. I really feel bad because when you think about it, this is the class of 2020 from high school that didn't receive a graduation because of the pandemic, that is now being threatened with no graduation. So we're not even talking about really the psychological trauma that entails for a group of people who've already been through a ridiculously stressful 4-year period, now being told that their voice doesn't matter.
So I disagree with you on this one because, one, public safety. You know, everybody has their own process by which they process different things. Somebody can be, for lack of better terms, losing their mind or crazy and want to act up. So any public event, you would hope that it's up to the organizers to actually have the best interest for the people that are going to be there. We don't want any safety issues. It's a lot to also put on graduation for like protests to block it out.
So I'm gonna push back on it in this regard. The Miami Heat just got eliminated by the Boston Celtics. You would argue that Heat fans hate Boston fans. No one's talking about canceling the NBA playoffs because of what happens. More importantly, when we talk about these particular protests, one thing that's not being lifted up is many of the protesters, if you will, are Jewish folks. So this notion of public safety or harassment exclusively of Jewish people, again, disregards the fact that many of the encampments and protests are being led, in effect, by Jewish folks. Moreover, the same safety protocols that have been in place for decades have been in place. No guns, no weapons, no anything, because these are graduations that in many cases are happening at arenas, stadiums, et cetera, that already have security protocols. So your disagreement seems, a little off-putting.
No, not off-putting, because if you think about it, these are families, lives, human lives at hand. I've done graduations all through and through, and it won't kill somebody or hurt somebody not to go to graduation. I'd rather a college says, hey, Tegan, I want you to not show up because we have concerns that people are going to be rallying and protesting to disrupt the event. So I understand that it's, targeting Jewish people, but that can spill over to other people who, for honestly, don't have any really issues with what's going on. So how do you, think about this, politics aside, human lives. If there's a threat, we need to do better and maybe have graduation at a different time. COVID happened and we had graduation the year after.
Graduations are inherently political to begin with.
Okay.
What students put on their cap and gowns, the statements that they make, the speeches that are given, these are oftentimes functioning political events. And so the idea of raising this notion of a threat level in 2024 feels like a moot point, considering that graduation still existed during the Vietnam War. Graduation still existed during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. Graduations existed during the height of the anti-apartheid movement. So this doesn't feel, for me, fundamentally different.
Information now is way different from information then. So Tennessee, Governor Bill Lee signs into law a bill allowing teachers to carry arms.
Yes.
As an educator, I don't know how this happened. What's your take?
Simple answer is foolishness. I was a 17-year public school educator, and what I would oftentimes say is that the reason you have so few occurrences of mass violence at schools, despite what you've been reading about, in terms of the totality, is because teachers are inadvertently trained in de-escalation. When you provide a pathway for me as a teacher to now have a gun in school, all you're doing is creating a potential pathway to harm not only the teachers carrying the guns, the children who you're there to keep safe, as well as so many other people. So Bill Lee's on the wrong side of history, as are all of these legislators that are trying to say that arming teachers is a good idea.
Affirmative action. It's been a year since the Supreme Court overturned that legal precedent. Should it come back? Is it still important? Why?
Yes, affirmative action needs to be in place. Racism still exists, as we're finding out by the banning of books, the removal of DEI programs at universities, the harm that's being inflicted on BIPOC students on these campuses because of the absence of those programs. So yes, affirmative action is absolutely necessary because the playing field has yet to be even. But I do want to remind folks that affirmative action wasn't to allow people who, didn't have the right credentials to get in. It was to expand the playing field because of the fact there had been limited access prior to.
Colleges are getting so competitive. And for me, if you think about affirmative action, it's not saying that you're not qualified to attend a college. It's saying, let's consider your race. And now having that being a blind factor, I don't know how you admit a class that is very culturally diverse, rich, and unique.
Right, but you have to understand the intent, right? You're talking about, let's just use universities in the South as an example. Many of these colleges, University of Florida, University of Georgia, University of Tennessee, didn't admit their first Black students until the late 60s, early 70s. People don't understand that it's only been 50 years that Black people have been allowed on these campuses. So the idea that somehow, because you have Black, Latino, Asian students on these campuses over the last 50 years, that you've gotten rid of all the remnants of racism that existed prior to is foolhardy. And so I just want to remind folks that we still have work to do in this country to be better. Affirmative action was trying to get us there. The absence of it, what people will see, is a return, unfortunately, to the lack of diversity that you speak of.
And I think also for a lot of people of color, you have to work twice as hard or 3 times as hard to get the same opportunity, to get the same goal that your other counterparts, can easily get.
Yeah, you're referring to the black tax, as we call it in the community, right? And it's this idea that you have to do that. But the sad reality is that you have folks out there saying that the valedictorian in an all-black high school, their 4.0 isn't the same as somebody who goes to a predominantly white private school. So if we're saying that the same classes equate to the same measure of learning, then that child on the south side of Chicago should have equal access to, to colleges that the person at the predominantly white institution in Connecticut does.
Speaking of access, Florida has a bill, actually a law, that's going to put a limit on abortions, 6 weeks. Should women these days still have their bodies being controlled by the state?
No, women these days should not. But I also think it's important for people to understand what reproductive rights mean. It means your right to both have and not have children. Okay. And people don't fully appreciate that, is that not everyone wants to be a parent. Not everyone has the financial means to be a parent. And the idea of closing the door for access to reproductive care or abortion care means that you are forcing people to go. But the cruelty of the 6-week almost total ban is going to play out in a significant way here in the state of Florida. And all you have to do is look at other states that have adopted these policies around the dangers that it's causing, especially to black women. And so I especially want black viewers to understand that when they do these kinds of things, it is definitely marked with a level of racism that people don't appreciate.
For the communities that you work in, how do they see Obamacare and healthcare costs?
Well, 2 different things. I think we talk about the notion of Obamacare and forget why it was necessary when President Obama had it, passed it. Insurance companies could basically discriminate against anyone for a pre-existing condition prior to Obamacare. So what does that mean for black people? We have higher levels of hypertension, higher levels of sickle cell anemia, higher levels of ovarian cancer. That means that because you are black and because you have the disproportionate impact of this in your family history, meant that an insurance company, even though you didn't show any traits, could discriminate against you because of it. So Obamacare is absolutely necessary. The other part that has been happening, though, is this chipping away. And so what insurance companies now have been able to do because of, some of the processes of Congresses since Obama is chip away at the protections of Obamacare. And so people need to understand why we need universal health care, but also why Obamacare was so critically important.
So I'm a big proponent of healthcare and healthcare provisions, but I think the data is also not enough. Because 1, you have these different thoughts that, okay, insurance companies don't discriminate against you for pre-existing conditions, but then the far right tells you that, okay, it actually still happens. So where do we know what's the level playing field, number 1? Because there's a lot going on,
right? And
it seems like at the end of the day, it's up to the insurance company to decide what they want to do.
But that's the hypocrisy of the far right. And the reason I say that is because the far right put these loopholes in place. Again, when Obamacare was initially passed, there were basically fines that were waged against insurance companies that discriminated against folks, meaning that if they said they couldn't insure you, they would be fined by the federal government. What the far right did was take away those fines and restrictions, and now you've created a situation where insurance companies have found a backdoor to discriminate against people the same way they were doing prior to Obamacare existing.
Dwight, I want to ask you about your music playlist before we go.
Let's go.
Team Kendrick or Team Drake?
Always Team Kendrick.
Why?
Team Kendrick because I'm a believer in lyricism. And what Kendrick Lamar has been able to do with his projects, his catalog of work, is show a raising of the bar, if you will, in terms of wordplay. There are some people that are definitely firm believers in beats or trend lines when it comes to hip hop. I am a Nas, Biggie, Jay-Z. I'm in the lyrical camp, and Kendrick represents the embodiment of that lyricism.
Well, he makes you think too much. I'm like, I don't want to think today. I want to have good fun. Drake is for like
Drake is for a good time.
Yeah.
Kendrick makes me think.
I mean, probably because you're always thinking grassroots work. That's why. So I understand, but
You ask somebody else, they might be different.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Oh, one more thing. How can people connect with you?
Check us out at floridarising.org. We're also on social media at FO Rising, my own personal social media. As you look at Dwight Bullard, you'll find this beard somewhere online, and give me a follow.